spot today we have John Lennon. Of course, we all know John Lennon as one part of the Beatles who went on after they disbanded to have a very successful solo career. Lennon was not only a musician, but also a peace activist who was strongly anti-war. He was not afraid to display his activism and held a 2-week anti-war demonstration. There was a period of 3 years where the Nixon administration was trying to have him deported for his criticism against the Vietnam War. On December 8th, 1980, Lennon was leaving the Dakota apartment complex when he was stopped by a man named Mark David Chapman. Lennon signed an autograph for Mark, which is what is happening in this photo, and then Lennon went on his way. Little did he know, Mark was going to shoot him later that night. Once Lennon returned to the apartment complex, Mark was there waiting for him to commit his crime. Mark has said he did it mostly for the attention, which is so horrifying, but Mark is also a very religious man who explained that Lennon once saying that the Beatles were more famous than Jesus is what really pushed him to commit this crime. It is very crazy that this photo was captured when Lennon was being kind to who he thought was a fan, and no one could have predicted what would happen just a few hours later.
Moving on to number 9 now, the Omagh bombing. In 1998, Ireland and Northern Ireland were experiencing the Troubles, a time where a group called the IRA were carrying out civilian attacks in Ireland and the UK in their fight for a united Ireland. On August 15th, the streets of a small town called Omagh were busy with Saturday shoppers and tourists. On one street, in the middle of a small crowd, a car bomb exploded from a stolen car the IRA had put there and filled with explosives. The blast killed 29 people, including 2 unborn babies, and injured over 200 others. This picture was taken just minutes before the bomb went off. That red Vauxhall car you can see on the right was the car that exploded. The camera with this picture inside was found in the rubble. The man and the child in the picture survived. The photographer sadly did not. Coming in at the number 8 spot now, we have the JFK assassination. On November 22nd, 1963, US President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed by a gunman during a presidential motorcade in Dallas, Texas. Now, there has been a lot of discussion and analysing of the famous footage of that event, but this is perhaps the most famous picture from just before the event. Here, JFK can be seen smiling and greeting the crowd who turned out to see him as their car begins a journey he will not live to see the end of. For the millions that thought JFK would change America for the better, his murder was a tragedy of epic proportions. Next up at number 7 now, we have the Titanic. Now, we all know the famous tragedy of when RMS Titanic sank in the North Atlantic, killing 1,517 people. We have the stories, we have documentaries about it, we even have one of the most famous movies of all time. But have you ever seen a picture of the real thing? This is the last picture ever taken of the Titanic. It was taken as the boat left its last stop of Queenstown in Ireland before heading west to New York. Now, as we now know, it would never make that journey, sinking 3 days later. The next time a photograph would capture images of that boat physically would be in 1985, 73 years after it sank. Coming in at the number 6 spot now, we have the Challenger crew. NASA's space shuttle launches rarely go wrong, so when they do, it's incredibly shocking. In January 1986, NASA's space shuttle Challenger launched from the Kennedy Space Center. 17% of all Americans were watching this on live TV, partly due to the fact that along with the 6 astronauts on board, there was a teacher with them, set to be the first teacher in space. But 73 seconds after the launch, disaster struck. A number of different oversights had led to a failure of some key parts of the shuttle during launch, and it quickly broke into pieces. All 7 crew members on board died. This picture was taken of them just before they boarded the shuttle. From front to back, Dick Scobie, Judith Resnick, Ronald McNair, Gregory Jarvis, Ellison Onizuka, teacher Krista McAuliffe, and Michael J. Smith. Next up at number 5 now, we have the Bataclan. The terrorist attacks in Paris on November 13th, 2015 are still fresh in many people's memories. 130 people were gunned down in various Paris locations by men who had sworn allegiance to ISIS. 89 of the victims died at the Bataclan Theatre, where one terrorist opened fire on a crowd watching a rock show. 2 of those people were couple Giles Leclerc and Marianne Labanan. Giles uploaded this picture to his Instagram as the pair waited for the show to begin, not long before the tragedy happened. Marianne survived, Giles sadly did not, along with 88 other victims at the Bataclan. Alright, moving on to number 4 now, we have the station fire. On February 20th, 2003, a band called Great White were playing a show in the Station nightclub in Rhode Island. They had pyrotechnics on stage behind them, which went off during one of their songs. Some of the sparks from this ignited ignited foam around the stage. This is a picture of the moment the spark turned into a flame. Now at first people thought it was all part of the act, but as the flames spread, people began to panic. They began to run to the exits, but this led to a crush in the hallway, blocking the main exit completely. In just a few minutes, the entire building was on fire, the inside filled with deadly black smoke, and people could not get out. 100 people died in the flames. It was the 4th deadliest nightclub fire in US history. Next up at number 3 now, we have Dave Sanders. On April 20th, 1999, students in the cafeteria at Columbine High School in Colorado heard loud bangs coming from nearby. Many of them thought it was a prank by 2 senior students, but one teacher, Dave Sanders, knew it was an attack. This was the Columbine High School massacre that killed 13 students. As the gunmen made their way to the cafeteria, hoping to mow down hundreds of students with bullets and bombs, Dave Sanders ran to the cafeteria to warn them. The security camera there captured this image of him leaving the cafeteria to try and save even more students. Unfortunately, he ran into the gunmen, who then shot him in the back. Dave Sanders died of his injuries, but he is remembered by the hundreds of people he saved. Moving on to number 2 now, we have the Beirut car bomb. On December 17th, 2013, a car bomb went off in the city of Beirut in Lebanon. Its target was thought to be Mohammed Chattar, a minister and ambassador to the US. It successfully killed Mr. Chattar as his car drove past, but also killed 7 other people. One of them was this 16-year-old boy wearing a red top called Mohammed Shah. That gold-colored car behind them is the car loaded with explosives, which would detonate just minutes after the group posed for this selfie. The other 3 people in this picture survived, but Mohammed was struck with a piece of shrapnel to his head. He was rushed to hospital, but sadly died from his injuries. And finally now, at number 1, we have the Halley family. In 2014, Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, flying from the Netherlands to Malaysia, was shot down by a surface-to-air missile from separatists in Ukraine, killing all 283 passengers on board. Now after the initial shock of this tragedy, the media started reporting on some of the personal stories behind it. Perhaps the most touching one was this picture taken by Dave Halley of his wife Kim and their 4-year-old daughter Megan just before takeoff. They were said to be embarking on the vacation of a lifetime, and Dave posted this picture to social media less than 3 hours before tragedy would strike everyone on board.
Number 10. The Hartley violin. While this may seem like just a photo of an old violin, the story behind it is incredibly significant. This is because the instrument managed to survive the sinking of the Titanic. We all know the story of the ship that hit the iceberg and sank, so let me tell you the story of Wallace Henry Hartley. Hartley was the band leader on the Titanic, and the violin was an engagement gift from his fiancée before he took off on the journey. He was one of the players who stood on the deck of the ship and played music while it sank, attempting to calm the frightened passengers as they boarded lifeboats. Hartley was found 2 weeks later, clutching the case that was strapped to his body. Inside it was his violin, still in good condition thanks to the case protecting it from the water and cold. It went on to be the most valuable Titanic artifact ever sold, selling at auction for $1.7 million. It is now displayed at a history museum in Branson, Missouri, going on to survive long after it played its final notes on the ship.
In our number 9 spot today, we have the Stanford prison experiment. This photo comes from 1971 during the Stanford prison experiment. For those of you who aren't familiar with this experiment, it started on August 14th, 1971 and was led by university psychology professor Philip Zimbardo. The experiment took student volunteers and divided them into 2 groups. One group of prisoners and one group of guards, and they placed all of the volunteers into a fake prison that was created for the experiment. The experiment aimed to see if and how quickly humans would turn evil under the right conditions with the right amount of power. Basically, it was just to try and answer the question of if humans are inherently good or inherently evil. I think everyone was shocked with the results. After only 6 days, the experiment needed to be concluded because the guards began absolutely tormenting the prisoners. It really showed the kinds of things humans can be capable of even after such a short time. This photo is definitely reminiscent of that experiment and serves as our reminder. In number 8 spot today we have the Pioneer's Defense. This photo is known as the Pioneer's Defense, and man does it ever look creepy. This photo comes from 1937 and was taken by a Russian photographer named Viktor Bula. This photo takes place in the Leningrad area, which is now known as St. Petersburg, which is the second largest city in Russia. The people in this photo were a part of a group that was the 1930s Russian equivalent of our Boy Scouts, which was called the Young Pioneers. The masks on their faces leave a very eerie feeling, and for a fair reason. These people were doing a military preparation drill, which is the reason for the gas masks. This photo was taken during a time when the country was under the dictatorship of Joseph Stalin, and the residents were constantly unsure of what was going to happen. The country was already seeing death, and people were already frightened just a few years before the start of World War II. In our number 7 spot today, we have the Stanley Hotel. This is a photo of the Stanley Hotel, which is the hotel that inspired the famous Stephen King novel, The Shining. This hotel was under construction in the early 1900s and saw a fateful day in 1911. There was an unexplained explosion that happened in room 217. In the explosion, a chambermaid was seriously injured, but she ended up surviving and actually returning to work. A few years later, she passed away, and ever since her passing, there have been tons of guests who swear they saw her ghost. Guests have said that they have seen her around the halls of the hotel, but the place that gets the most paranormal activity is of course room 217. This is the room where Stephen and his wife stayed for one terrifying night in 1974. Apparently they were actually the only guests in the hotel for this night, which at any other hotel might be cool, but I feel like this is not what you want from a haunted hotel. In our number 6 spot today, we have the Rothschild Surrealist Ball. The Rothschild family is one of the wealthiest and most powerful families there has ever been. For years and years, there have been many rumors swirling about just how powerful and influential they really are, and there are some pretty crazy theories out there. In 1972, the family held a surrealist ball, which is where this photo is from. These photos could be potentially very innocent, but there is just something about these elaborate masks, coupled with the theories about what this family is really up to, that just make it feel very eerie. This party is one of the most legendary there has ever been, and whether or not they really are involved in shady dealings, that still is impressive. In our number 5 spot today, we have the Salem UFO. On the morning of July 16th, 1952, this photo was captured by Shell Alpert and has stumped people ever since. This photo shows 4 unidentified objects hovering in the air above Salem, Massachusetts, and was taken at the Salem Coast Guard Air Station. The objects seem to be above the Winter Island and Cat Cove areas, but there really isn't much more that is known about this strange incident. There were a few theories regarding this photo. One is a camera glitch. Others think it may have just been light reflecting off of the window that the photo was taken through. But of course, there are people who point to similar incidents that happened in the 1950s, and of course believe it is proof of extraterrestrial beings. It is very likely we may never know exactly, but the air of mystery it leaves is definitely kind of cool. In our number 4 spot today, we have the eruption of Mount St. Helens. Mount St. Helens is a stratovolcano located in Skamania County, Washington. The volcano is best known for its huge and disastrous eruption on May 18th, 1980. This photograph comes from photographer Robert Landsberg, who was of course in the area at the time of this eruption. Before the eruption, he had visited the area in order to photograph and document all of the changes that were happening. On May 18th, he was within a few miles of the volcano when it erupted. Since he unfortunately was located so close to the explosion, he knew that he would be unable to escape this disaster, so instead of focusing on the impossible, he focused on taking as many pictures as possible. Robert was obviously incredibly brave and dedicated, but also very smart. After snapping as many photos as he could, including this one, he then secured his camera in his backpack and covered his backpack with his body. He knew he was unlikely to survive, but wanted to make sure that these photos did. His body was found 17 days later with his backpack still underneath him. His film was of course developed and has provided geologists with some really valuable insights with his close documentation of the eruption. In our number 3 spot today, we have this burst of joy. You might be looking at this photo wondering how this extremely joyous photo could hold any dark secrets. Well, this photo won a Pulitzer Prize, and for a good reason. This photo was captured by Slava Vetter on March 17, 1973 at the Travis Air Force Base in California. The photo shows United States Air Force Lieutenant Colonel Robert L. Sturm and his family. This was taken as he was being reunited with his family after 5 years of being held as a prisoner of war in North Vietnam. On October 27, 1967, he was leading a flight of F-105s when he was shot down over Hanoi and held captive until March 14, 1973. I can't imagine what this must have been like for his family, because there was a chance that he could have not come home at all. The girl with her arms wide is his 15-year-old daughter, but the look on all of their faces truly captures the pure joy that they are all feeling. In our number 2 spot today, we have the frozen man of Mount Everest. This photo comes from 1996, and it shows Beck Weathers getting treated after the Mount Everest disaster. The Mount Everest disaster took place on May 10th and 11th in 1996, where there was a blizzard on the mountain that ended up stranding and taking the lives of 8 people who were aiming to descend the mountain. Beck was a part of the team who was climbing the mountain on this fateful day, and he ended up suffering from snow blindness during the climb. He actually fell into a hypothermic coma because it was so cold, and he suffered severe frostbite on his face, hands, and feet. Pretty miraculously, he not only survived, but ended up walking back down to camp in order to get help, where he was then taken by helicopter to receive treatment. He ended up needing his hands, part of his feet, and even his nose amputated, but he survived this whole ordeal, and that is the most important thing. In our number 1 spot today, we have the Dyatlov Pass incident. If you have never heard of the Dyatlov Pass incident, you better buckle in, because it is so terrifying. This photo was taken in February of 1959 as 9 young Soviet hikers set out to trek through the Ural Mountains. They had set up camp, and sometime during the night, something happened that made them cut their way out of the tent and all flee the site. Leaving in such a rush, they were of course underdressed for the bitterly cold weather, and 6 of them ended up passing away from hypothermia, which is extremely tragic. The other 3, however, is where this story takes a frightening turn. Like I mentioned before, no one knows why they fled the tent in the first place, and the last 3 hikers were found passed away with severe signs of physical trauma that no one could agree on what had caused it. In 2019, the investigation was reopened, and just last year there was a conclusion that a kind of avalanche called a slab avalanche was the cause of these injuries. Regardless of what happened, this whole incident was of course very tragic, but the mystery behind it definitely takes it to a spooky place.
So, coming in at number 10 now, we have the US figure skating team. In 1961, the US figure skating team were invited to the World Figure Skating Championships in Prague. There was high hopes for the team's success. The men's team had won the gold medal at every Olympics for 13 years, and the women's team were looking to defend their gold medal from the previous year. They took this picture before boarding their Boeing 707 aircraft in New York. The flight was to make a scheduled stopover in Belgium, but when they came in to land, they were forced to abort the landing because a small plane was still on the runway. The plane had to pull up abruptly but could not stabilize its wings in time and ended up spiraling to the ground, where it crashed into a field. All 72 passengers on board were killed. The cause of the crash was never really established, but it's believed to have been some sort of failure of the stabilizer adjusting mechanism. Now, if any of you don't like flying because of stories like this, don't worry. Aircraft safety has come a long way in the past 50 years.
Number 9. Big Island hiker. In 2015, Dalen Pua decided to go on a hike in Hawaii. He told his grandmother he was going to be hiking the Stairway to Heaven trail, which his grandmother warned against as this was a prohibited area. While on his hike, he posted several pictures to social media. Most seemed to be normal, just showing off the view. However, in one photo, you can see a man amongst the trees, following behind Dalen. While a mysterious man in the woods is creepy enough, it gets worse, as Dalen unfortunately never returned from his hike, and to this day, he has never been found. His family studied the pictures closely, trying to find any clues to his whereabouts, and when they spotted the figure, they started to wonder if maybe he had been responsible for Dalen's disappearance. People wonder why this person has not come forward, wondering if it's because because he was involved, or he was just scared of being caught hiking on an illegal trail. The search for Dalen consisted of the fire department, local volunteers, drone operators, and even the US Navy, and unfortunately, nothing has ever been found. Number 8. Trails in the snow. Another hiking photo, this one comes from a mountain in the Karakoram Himalaya. Greatly accomplished mountaineer Kurt Diemberger was accompanied by his friend Herman Buhl. Buhl had been excited about the expedition, wanting to complete the hike in only 3 days. The photo that Diemberger took seems to be normal, a photo of their tracks on the snowy mountain. However, when you look closely, you can see that one of the tracks does not continue, instead falling off the side. This is because Diemberger took this photo after Herman Buhl fell off the side of the mountain. Retreating from a snowstorm, Buhl stepped off to the side, triggering a massive avalanche, and fell almost 900 meters down the slope, never to be seen again. Diemberger notes how in this situation they had not been roped together, which would have been considered a mistake in any other scenario. In this case, however, he says that if they were tied together, that he would have been pulled down, becoming lost in the avalanche with his friend as well. He went on to say that he would never attempt that mountain again, as without Buhl, there is no point. Number 7. Basketball card. By all accounts, this appears to be a regular NBA hoops card, showcasing Mike Jackson from the Knicks. However, if you look at the two young men on the left, you will realize that they are actually the Menendez brothers, Eric and Lyle. If you're not familiar, the Menendez brothers were from a wealthy family and were found guilty of killing their parents after they had allegedly mistreated them. The two weren't immediately caught and went on a spending spree and apparently watched a New York Knicks game. That's right, this photo was actually taken after the crime and before they had been arrested. After the discovery of the card, the Daily Mail was actually able to contact Lyle Menendez in San Diego prison, where both brothers are housed. He said, "It's amazing that somebody spotted it," also commenting on the haunting period that took place after the crime and before the arrest, saying that they went to a lot of Knicks games before, so going to one after wouldn't have been that extravagant. The cards are now available on eBay, usually going for about $5 to $10. Number 6. Rodney Alcala. During the 1970s, a famous game show aired called The Dating Game. The purpose of this show is for one woman to speak to 3 hidden men, asking them questions. By the end of the show, she chooses the one she wants to go on a date with, and after the show, they go. 17-year-old Leanne Leadham appeared on the show with her 3 eligible bachelors, one of which was Rodney Alcala. The show goes fine and nothing seems too out of the ordinary, Rodney even being selected as the man she would go on a date with. What viewers and producers of the show didn't know was that when Rodney was sitting on that chair, he had already committed 4 murders. It's eerie to watch the episode with the hindsight of what had happened. Luckily for Leanne, she changed her mind and never actually went on the date with Rodney, only having a photo shoot together. It makes you wonder just how many other people you've seen on TV or in photos who are actually hiding a terrible secret. Number 5. Autograph. This photo from 1980 isn't all too concerning. It shows John Lennon signing an autograph. The reality of it, however, is that he was signing an autograph for Mark Chapman, the man who merely a few hours later would kill him as he returned home from a recording studio. Chapman had approached Lennon with a fairly rare record, asking Lennon to sign it for him. Lennon then asked, "Is that all?" To which Chapman replied with, "No." Chapman says that at the time this picture was taken, he actually had the weapon in his pocket, but had chickened out of committing the crime at this time. He then went back to Lennon's apartment where he waited for several hours, reading Catcher in the Rye. Finally, as John returned home from the recording studio with tapes under his arms, Chapman shot him. He returned to reading his book until a security guard arrived, the man in tears asking if Mark realized what he had done. Mark was justly sentenced to life in prison. Number 4. Space Crew. In this photo, we see the smiling faces of 7 astronauts posing in zero gravity. Unfortunately, as with most things on this list, this story does not have so happy an ending. That's because this is the crew of the Columbia Space Shuttle. The crew spent 24 hours a day in 2 different shifts, doing various different experiments in life sciences, material sciences, fluid physics, and others. Eventually, they were ready to return home to Earth in 2003. However, their re-entry would prove disastrous. On On launch, it was discovered that a piece of foam had broken off and left a hole in the left wing. This hole allowed atmospheric gases to get into the ship eventually completely breaking apart. NASA suspended any shuttle flights for at least 2 years as they investigated, and were apparently criticized as the issue with foam that caused the disaster had been previously known by the organization. This led to the retirement of the space shuttle fleet, astronauts now making their way to the International Space Station by means of Russian rockets or the SpaceX space taxi service. Number 3. The Oscars. This photo is of Howard Ashman and Alan Menken. It shows the two men celebrating as they had just won an Oscar. They had written the lyrics and music for The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, and Aladdin, and in this photo, they were receiving the award for The Little Mermaid. While they seem excited, if you look closely at Howard Ashman on the left, it seems like something is wrong. That night, Ashman told Menken that when they got back to New York, they needed to have a serious talk. 2 days later, they returned and they spoke. Howard told Alan that he had been diagnosed with late-stage AIDS and didn't have much longer to live. Menken says he recalls Ashman saying, "I didn't want to tell you because I didn't know how Disney would react. Here I am, a gay man, and I'm working on a movie for kids, and I didn't want to be fired." As Disney found out, they instead did everything they could to allow him to continue to work on Beauty and the Beast, even packing up their storyboards and going to his home in New York. Howard later died in 1991 with a long list of accomplishments behind him. Number 2. Memorial photos. These photos look like any other historical portrait. An important fact to note about taking pictures in the olden days was that it took a long time. Like a really long time. I'm talking hours. There was definitely no quick selfie taking back then. Because of this, it was common for the subjects in photos to appear a bit blurry, because you can't expect people to be able to keep perfectly still. But if you look closely at those photos, you'll probably notice that some of the subjects are incredibly clear. Were they just masters of staying still? Well, you could say that since some of the people in these photos aren't alive. And I don't just mean because it's been so long that they've passed away by now, I mean they aren't alive in the photos. Doing this was actually incredibly common back then and seen as a way to memorialize your loved ones and help lessen grief. It is commonly referred to as post-mortem photography, and the people in the photos were often propped up on stands in order to be held in place. Number 1. Jeannie. This may look like the portrait of a normal little girl, but the truth of her story is the exact opposite of normal. Jeannie Wiley is well known as one of the most popular examples of a feral child, and this is a photo of her. She had been kept tied to a chair for the majority of her childhood, not allowed to speak or cry, her father having often barked and growled at her like a dog. She became an important look into how the minds of children are shaped and how important it is to learn from a young age. While she learned some words, it seems that she never fully learned how to speak properly. Although she couldn't speak, she seemed to be learning quickly, and she actually performed well on intelligence tests. She learned to draw, dress herself, and enjoy music. While she was incredibly popular and widely discussed, no one knows exactly where she is now. She's apparently in an adult foster care home somewhere in California, now over 60 years old.